So just take a few minutes to focus on the breath, and we'll set our motivation, and then we'll recite the Heart Sutra and the prayers together. So I'll ring the bell to begin the meditation. So again, just a few minutes of single-pointed concentration on the breath as best as you can. So now let's set our motivation together for today's class. And one topic I'll be talking about a little bit later today, can already maybe teach a little bit as part of this meditation, is the idea that we need to observe sentient beings within the understanding of emptiness. When we generate our motivation, a bodhicitta that is rooted in compassion, our compassion can be deepened to an even greater degree when we understand that all sentient beings, just like ourselves, are lacking any inherent existence, completely empty. And yet, ourselves and all sentient beings still in samsara are continuing to observe things in a false way. As we've talked about before, they have this ignorance that is grasping at inherent existence, thinking of themselves and all phenomena existing intrinsically from their own side. And it's due to this error, of course, that we suffer, as we discussed in the very first class. Under the control of that ignorance, whether we engage in positive or negative states of mind and create virtuous or non-virtuous karma respectively, we still continue to experience only results within samsara. As long as our minds are contaminated by ignorance, we will never know true freedom. So when we observe sentient beings with this understanding, it informs our compassion to a greater degree. Because first of all, we more clearly understand why beings are suffering, because they are clinging to this falsity. thinking that they and all things exist inherently. But moreover, we also understand, because we ourselves have been investigating emptiness, understanding that things lack inherent existence, and looking at the reasonings that help us to develop that wisdom, we know that we can be free of that ignorance. And all these beings can be free of that ignorance. So our compassion takes on another dimension when we are able to observe sentient beings within that understanding. So once more, dedicate yourself to this path of awakening, a strong intention to develop yourself fully into the state of Buddhahood, so that you then can become the cause for all beings to know that same wisdom and to develop themselves into the state of Buddhahood as well. And think that it's for this reason that you're here again today, engaging in these teachings. Okay. Thank you, Anil, for getting the prayers on the screen. Let's go ahead and recite those together then again, first with the Heart Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on Massa Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the bodhisattva, mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All, have to go back up one. Having all the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the bodhisattva mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the bodhisattva mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. And we do the short mandala offering as we usually do. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami. And then refuge in bodhicitta, once in English, twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gi pe sonam gi Dola penchir sangye drupar shog sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gi pe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog. Okay, thank you, Anil. So let's get back into the material where we were. We're in the final class of this series on emptiness. Again, this is part of the Discovering Buddhism course, which, by the way, we will continue in the new year, though Venerable Rabina is taking over for the final module of this round of Discovering Buddhism on Tantra, Introduction to Tantra. And again, I'm not sure of all the schedule, just keep checking back with the website and you'll see things for January filling in over time. So let's go ahead and I will share then the slideshow of where we were at. We didn't quite finish all of our topics last week, and so we do have a little bit more to do this week. Let me get the slideshow up there. Whoops. So last week we had these first 2 topics. We spent a fair amount of time on this, looking at this whole idea of once we begin to understand the transitory nature of things and the illusory nature of things, we can begin to hold that view because everything, once more, is appearing to be inherently existent. This is part of the problem. Through the force of our ignorance, we have created this imprint in our minds that causes this false appearance. An illusion is based on those 2 ideas, that there is something that is appearing to exist in one way, but through the force of our understanding, we acknowledge that it doesn't exist in the way that it appears. And so this is an important thing to recall because otherwise we're going to continue to fall under the sway of this false appearance and continue to buy into things existing in the way that they appear. That's why we have to use our reasonings that we looked at in this course, the reasoning of dependent arising, the reasoning that entails the 4-point analysis, and we have to undermine our ignorance constantly because it's in opposition to how things are appearing to us. And then to get to this point in the second topic that we talked about noticing how everything depends upon thought, how things are established merely through designation, that there isn't anything substantial from the side of the object that determines that. Maybe before we go on to talk about karma and emptiness, which I introduced briefly at the end, I want to talk a little bit about an example that I frequently use for this whole idea of how everything depends upon thought. It's a film that maybe some of you saw. It came out many, many years ago. I was living in San Francisco at the time and went to see it twice at the theater, actually, because I kind of liked it. But now I go back and watch it. And it's not that great a film by any means, ends, but the beginning is what's really quite interesting. It's a film called The Gods Must Be Crazy. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but there's this airplane at the very beginning of these two guys that are flying over the Kalahari Desert, and the one guy's finishing his bottle of Coca-Cola, and he flings his bottle out the window of the plane, and it goes sailing down, and this bushman of the Kalahari kind of hears this thing coming, and it plop lands into the sand, and he goes over there to kind of, poke around to see what it is. He thinks that it's some mystical object that somehow landed in his environment, and he eventually picks it up, and of course he's amazed by this. He's never seen anything like this before, right? This glass shaped into this bottle and what have you. And so he takes it back, and he and his fellow tribes people, they all start doing all these things like smoothing out snake skin with it and using it to pound up grain and doing all these various things. And he thinks that this is wonderful, that he's gotten this gift from the gods. Of course, the film goes on from there, and of course, the main problem is the gods only gave him one. So there becomes this whole animosity that starts happening, for tension, competition for who can get the bottle and use it and whatever. Of course, the audience is watching it, right? All of us who know what a Coca-Cola bottle is, and we're holding on to our fixed view of this being a Coca-Cola bottle that is being used for all these various things. And of course, we're not denying that it can be used for those things, but we still hold on to this very concrete view of it being a Coca-Cola bottle. But for the bush people of the Kalahari, they don't have that view, right? They're not even knowing it as Coca-Cola bottle. It has no identity as Coca-Cola bottle whatsoever. But it is still this gift from the gods that they are using, and they have their own identification of it, their own way of imputing a label onto that, and then working with it from there. And it's completely functional within that. It serves a function because they are designating that as such. They have their own way of imputing an idea onto that. And their idea is really just as valid as ours is. Another example that one teacher used when I was first starting to study in San Francisco was something that could be mistaken as a chew toy for a dog. So I have this little ringer that I use when I ring the bell here, and start meditation and what have you. This is made out of wood. So if I had a dog in the room, I don't have a dog anymore, but if I had a dog that liked to chew, I could throw this across the room and the dog would have a great time sinking its teeth into the wood, right? So what is really going on there? We would look at it from a human perspective and say, oh, Don, the dog has your, your bell ringer. You better go get it or it's going to be destroyed, and we're seeing it from that vantage point of our identification of this as something that rings the bowl or the bell for meditation. But the dog doesn't know it as that, right? The dog has a totally different perspective of this. This is a chew toy, whatever their sort of conceptualization of that is. They don't even use the word chew toy necessarily unless we train them to hear those words. If we buy chew toys for them, they go, oh, you want a chew toy? And then they hear that and they know that. But they have a totally different experience of this object. That's their imputation. That is their designation. That is equally valid. It's not an inherently existent bell ringer that is being misappropriated to be used as a chew toy. It has no identity from its own side. This piece of wood that I have in my hands isn't an inherently existent object. It can be imputed by different beings in terms of their own particular perspective of it. This actually leads us into this whole topic of karma and emptiness, because karma, we see, is the sort of force through which we do have various experiences of our external world. And of course, it also operates at an internal level. But here we're mostly talking about, again, how we are perceiving the world that we experience. And I introduced you at the very tail end of the class this whole idea of if you had let's use the word vessel, because I used the word glass last time. Of course, that would be what we would have. We'd take a glass off our shelf and we'd fill it with water and we'd put it on a table. But if we kind of perceive it or look at it as from the perspective of being simply a vessel that is holding a liquid, we would invite in two other guests that are from a different realm of being that have a different karma. And the gods that come from this realm where they're completely under the control of virtuous karma that causes them to have these heavenly experiences, these very beautiful, delicious, delightful experiences. They would see it as ambrosia. That would be what this liquid would appear to them as. Then you invite in the pretas, the hungry ghosts, who come from the realm of suffering, where they, under the force of their bad karma, they are having to experience this obstacle in getting what they need to eat and drink. So when they approach something like what appears to be water in our world, it would appear as pus and blood for them. So we have this vessel with fluid in it that has three different appearances according to the karma of the beings who are experiencing it. And even though we took it from, our tap here in the world of the humans, it doesn't have any inherent existence as that water. It is simply water from our world, but that's from our human perspective. But that could be perceived as ambrosia for the gods and as, pus and blood for the hungry ghosts, and there's no error within that. We would say each of them are having what we would call a valid cognition of that as what they are experiencing it as, because that's informed by their karma. And of course, karma plays a role in everything that we experience. As I've pointed out previously, I think I did this in this course, that we even are imputing attributes and qualities to things that are not inherently there. If you have something pleasant that you enjoy, and let's use music as the example, because I tend to always use that one due to my own attachment to music. But if you have your favorite piece of music or the type of music that you like, you think that it has some sort of inherent beauty within it. You think that it is just, imbued with that, and you even exaggerate it. That's what the mind of attachment is about. Is it exaggerates the pleasant qualities and thinks that there's nothing unpleasant about it. But we know that our music isn't liked by everybody to the degree that we like it. And if we play it for somebody else who doesn't like that type of music, they'll look at us and go, oh, get that off. That's horrible music. What are you doing? I don't like that music at all. This is what I like. And they'll put on their music and maybe we go, take that off. That's horrible. I don't want to hear that. So who's right? The person who thinks the music is beautiful or the person who thinks the music is horrible? They're both right in the sense that their own karma is dictating how they experience that particular object. So whether we talk about the identity of something such as the fluid in the vessel that is perceived in three different ways, or the qualities that are imputed on it, they're all karmically determined. There's nothing from the side of the object that determines it as beautiful or ugly or whatever the case might be. We have that wonderful phrase in our culture, right? A beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Well, this is absolutely in line with Buddhist thinking. There's no beauty from the side of the object. We experience things as beautiful, or even become conditioned to see particular things as beautiful. I mean, if we look at human beauty, a beautiful face or whatever, you can go to different cultures on this planet and find people having a totally different perspective of what is a beautiful person, what's an attractive person. These are all culturally conditioned, conventionally designated through the force of our own actions and so on. We don't have anything inherently there from the side of the object. And of course, this is what's going on all the time, is that we're karmically being influenced to see our world in a particular way. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, in some teachings he did at the Light of the Path in 2009, I believe it was, he talks about how we can kind of see this as being like a movie, like we are creating our own movie, our own film that we're sort of experiencing. Because we know that this even happens too, right? You can have two people involved in a similar experience. They both go to the same party or gathering or whatever it might be nowadays, maybe not with COVID, that's not happening, but they go to some sort of event and they have a completely different experience. Even a couple can do that, right? Who are pretty used to each other and have maybe similar tastes, but one of them will go, oh, that was just a horrible evening. I really hated it. And you go, really? I had a good time, Well, like, well, who was right? You're sort of, again, being karmically influenced to have your own movie, whether you want to have a tragedy or whether you want to have a comedy or whether you want to have, a drama, whatever. These are within the domain of your own karma. Again, we're not saying that there aren't external things happening. It's not just a pure projection from our minds. This is the way that another branch of Buddhism that's called the mind only, the Chittamatrans, are seeing things as if there's a sort of karmic projection with no external world, as if there's nothing there, and this is all just through the force of our karma arising. There are bases for things, just like we would take the glass of water from our kitchen and put it on the table, and then these other beings would have a different experience of that. Or we would take this and throw it to the dog, and the dog has its own experience of this wooden dowel as a chew toy. But this is saying that that external object doesn't have its own identity. It can't set itself up. It is experienced by beings, and beings therefore determine its function, its nature, its qualities. Everything is coming from the side of that. So karma is a key part of this, and karma is, of course, completely upheld within the understanding of emptiness. Some people, once more, I've talked about this idea of these two extremes. When you begin to move away from this hard, fast way that we've been looking at things as inherently existent, this extreme, we begin to move away. We fall into the extreme of nihilism. And we think that somehow then things aren't upheld, cause and effect aren't upheld, conventional reality isn't upheld. Well, no, conventional reality fits quite nicely with ultimate reality. Emptiness and karma and all the other things that play a role in terms of our experiences and samsara and nirvana, even all of this, they all are upheld within this sphere of emptiness. There is nothing inherently there, but yet things still do exist. So this is, again, a point that I just wanted to raise as part of this module, because I think it is worthwhile to emphasize that karma is actually playing a key role within the understanding of emptiness. It is what informs then what you experience, your movie, the movie of your life that you are living and being a part of and experiencing. And this is the way that everything has always functioned. That's, I guess, the one thing that I always find reassuring is it's not like you're discovering something that's never been there. It's something that has always been there. Everything has always operated within the sphere of emptiness. Karma, changing our various experiences and so on within the sphere of nothing having any inherent existence. And as it's often said, without emptiness being there, karma couldn't function. Without emptiness being there, our conventional world wouldn't be in existence at all. I think I may have mentioned this verse, but there's a verse from Nagarjuna in his text Fundamental Wisdom, which is one of the main texts that we rely upon in this middle way view of understanding how emptiness can be understood and worked with. He says, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, he says, "For the person for whom emptiness is possible, everything is possible. For the person for whom emptiness is impossible, nothing is possible." Now, it's not saying that emptiness would be utterly impossible. Emptiness is a reality. It's a fact. It has always been there, as I said. We've never been outside of the sphere of everything being empty of inherent existence. But for the person who's holding on to that type of misconception, they have to realize that within that understanding of things having inherent existence, nothing would be possible. If things were inherently identified, had their own fixed identity from their own side, no change would be possible. Nothing could happen. We'd be stuck in samsara, stuck in our ignorance. There'd be nothing that we could do to remove that. But instead, it's something that is arising based on its causes and conditions and so on, all this understanding of dependent arising, and it can therefore be changed. Because things are dependent arisings, they therefore can be maneuvered into various ways of changing our experience. Buddhahood is possible because of emptiness. Yeah, and so this is an important understanding to bring into all of this. And this goes into the next topic, which essentially is an understanding of the two truths, kind of getting to an identification of how this is put together, especially by these great masters like Lama Tsongkhapa, into an understanding of how we can look at our sphere of reality, kind of everything that exists. So these two truths, truth is actually kind of a label being given to these. One of these, conventional truth, is not really true in the way that it's being perceived, but nonetheless, it has some level of truth, so we're going to call it that. And then we have what are called ultimate truths. So this is what's called a dichotomy. All things that exist, all objects of knowledge, all existent phenomena are either conventional truths or ultimate truths. If they exist, they are one or the other. Of course, if they don't exist, then they don't fall into either of these categories because they're non-existent. But if it is something that is existing in our world, it will either be a conventional truth or an ultimate truth. Now, how are these established? We, of course, have different cognition for knowing these. We have conventional valid cognition that understands what exists conventionally, such things like table, or the I, the person, the self, form. Like in the Heart Sutra, when we say form is empty, emptiness is form. Form is referring to those things that are made of matter, that have that, dimension to them. They're material objects. So conventional truths are those things that are posited, established by conventional valid cognition that cannot be denied through either ultimate analysis, or nor can they be really contradicted by valid conventional understanding. So this includes all of the things that we deal with in our lives, right? Besides tables and selves and forms, we look at all the various things that exist, and we can establish them through conventional awareness. As we saw earlier, they are, in the end, only merely imputed. This, of course, goes back to our understanding of dependent arising. So everything that is in the nature of conventional truths, we don't really get at their nature when we establish them. That's the problem. When I establish this little bell ringer as such, I give it that identity. We all give it that identity through our conventional understanding. But then, of course, we think that it has its own conventional reality or established reality out here on the side of the object. It seems to be a bell ringer from its own side. It seems to have that. So again, these are not truths in the way that ultimate truth is true. And I want to explain that before we go back to the slide. Conventional truths are posited by our minds that are together with ignorance. We are going around and organizing our world. We organize our world so that some things are computers and some are cameras and some are lamps and some are, books and some are all these various things, all the things behind me, tankas and paintings and statues and whatever, is all back there. All of these various things are established through the force of a mind that's together with ignorance. So in that way, they aren't really true because, once more, they appear to be inherently existent, but they don't have that at all. And so we organize our world. And as I said, we do need to organize our world. If we didn't organize our world, we couldn't talk about any of this stuff. I wouldn't be able to, you point to various things and use language to speak to different ideas and what have you. We need conventional truth. In fact, Lama Tsongkhapa himself, when he was struggling with his own understanding of how to put this whole system together of the two truths, a vision of Manjushri appeared to him and said, you have to value conventionalities. You have to value the conventional world. The conventional world isn't utterly dismissed by emptiness. It is upheld within it, but within an understanding of how conventional reality is very, very slight. It's all these various things that are simply the basis for what we are positing them as, what we are organizing them as. There's no identity from the side of these objects at all. So when we talk about the conventional truths, we are talking about all those things that we can identify within our world that we validly posit, that we validly establish. There's nothing wrong with that side of it. It has to be there, as we see in that statement from the Heart Sutra that we'll revisit in a moment. So then when we talk about emptiness or the ultimate truths, these are what are found through ultimate analysis. Ultimate analysis being the mind that is not content with just simply our conventional understanding of things. Like if somebody says, have you seen my table? Well, then we go like, oh yeah, your table's in that room right now. I moved it in there. Well, that's a conventional valid cognition of table and its location. There's not a deeper investigation going on there. The ultimate valid cognition is saying, what is the nature of table? Does table exist in the way that it appears? Does it have its own identity from its own side? Can it set itself up as table? And what we find, as we found when we looked at these different analyses, is that we actually arrive at the emptiness of table. That's the conclusion of our analysis. We could do the same analysis we did for ourselves with the 4-point analysis. We could take a look at table and we could say, okay, the table seems to be existent from its own side. It seems to have its own identity. Well, that's what we're trying to negate. That's the object of negation. Well, there's two possibilities. If it does have inherent nature, either that inherent nature is going to be together with the bases of the table, which would be the tabletop and the 4 legs of the table. Let's just make it a basic table like that with just a top and 4 legs. So okay, so then we would identify that as one possibility. But we also have to say maybe there's an inherently existent table that is completely apart from those parts. It sounds absurd, right, when we think in that way, but we have to eliminate that possibility. That's the second step. The third step is we would go looking on that table, the parts of the table, to see if we can find the inherently existent table. So we look at the base and we say, is there the tabletop? Is the tabletop equivalent to the table? Well, no, because if you just bought a tabletop, if somebody said, oh, I want to sell you my table, and you go over there and all they have is the tabletop, you'd go like, well, no, I'm not interested in just a tabletop. I want a table. And any of the 4 legs are also not the table in an inherent way. We don't find them to be equivalent to the table in all ways. When we assemble it, sure, we've got the tabletop and we have the 4 legs, and you think, oh, that's the table. But again, can you find a unitary table when you have at least those 5 parts, the base or the tabletop, the 4 legs, that would mean that, again, if it was inherently there, you'd have at least 5 tables. The table that is the top, the table that is the 1 leg, 2nd leg, 3rd leg, 4th leg. You can do the same sort of analysis in regard to whether it is equivalent to the base for the table. Again, these 5 parts, which also have their parts and so on, as we discussed, previously. We keep going down and we never find anything that is sort of an inherently existent table. And then you can very quickly dismiss the idea that it could be other than the parts. Do I have a table in my room when I don't have any of the parts in the room? No, without a doubt. You need those parts for table to be there. So if we dismiss those 2 possibilities, that there's an inherently existent table that is equivalent to its parts, an inherently existent table that is other than its parts, well, then we've gotten to that emptiness. We've arrived at that emptiness of table, at the idea that table can't set itself up as table. Table is, again, with our understanding of dependent arising, we don't fall into the nihilistic point of view. We say table is merely a designation that we give to this collection of parts. There's no inherently existent table. And when you keep arriving at that place of the emptiness of table, you're eventually, you're conceptually first understanding it, but eventually understanding it at a very different level, the ultimate truth of that table. The ultimate truth of that table is its emptiness. So these 2 exist together. Table and its emptiness are kind of coexisting. And so when we put back up the screen here and we look at each of these phenomena in terms of the things that we establish as conventional truths, these 3 examples, we see that on the right-hand side is the emptiness of those objects, the emptiness of table, the emptiness of I, the emptiness of form. And we could also use the word selflessness here. We use that on occasion. But these things are coexisting, and they are inextricably bound up in whatever it is that is posited. If we posit that there is form, then together with that form is its emptiness. That's why when we say in the Heart Sutra, form is empty, emptiness is form, we're not making it utterly equivalent, because these are 2 different truths. And they, in fact, are what is called a dichotomy. If something is in one column on the left, it cannot be in the column on the right. If it's in the column on the right, it cannot be in the column on the left. And if it exists, it's in one column or the other. So form and emptiness of form are 2 different phenomena. Nonetheless, you cannot posit one without the other. If there is form, then there is the emptiness of form. If the emptiness of form exists, then the form must exist as a basis for that emptiness. There is no unitary emptiness that is, although everything is empty of inherent existence, there's not this singular phenomenon that's called emptiness. There are emptinesses, and every one of them is an ultimate truth with regard to its base. So emptiness of table with regard to table, and emptiness of I in regard to I, and so on. Everything is coexisting with its emptiness. This is what allows for its existence, as we've been seeing. The way that things arise in dependence upon various factors is facilitated and necessitated upon the emptiness of those phenomena. That there's nothing inherently there, therefore things can come into existence and can exist for the duration of their time of existence and then eventually disappear. And their emptiness would also disappear at that point. So when I talk about Don, this phenomenon Don, who is, here on screen teaching you right now, this is a name, a label that I'm giving to this collection of stuff called Don that is impermanent, that is changing. And there will come a time when Don is not in existence, when my body ceases to function and the consciousness leaves this and goes on to another existence. There's a new being then. There's a continuity of awareness that goes through all of these, but there was no inherently existent Don. But when Don first started, when there was the label given of Don to this collection of stuff by my parents, I don't know when they gave that label. I think they had my name chosen before I was born. That's because I was named after my uncle, my father's brother, who died. And so anyway, but they gave some label to that at some point, and then Don exists from that point. Then there's going to be a time when Don ceases to exist. Again, when all of that death process happens and there's no longer a Don. For the duration of that time, the emptiness of Don existed. And emptiness will go out of existence when Don goes out of existence. Now, if I talk about the emptiness of my mind, well, the emptiness of the consciousness that is together with this being that is called Don, well, that's a more eternal phenomenon, right? That's something that actually does go on because the mind goes on to other existences. And so you would have the emptiness of the mind always together with mind. As long as mind exists, then the emptiness of mind exists. And in fact, mind has no beginning, as we've seen earlier in this set of courses, and mind has no end. Even when I talk about my mind developing into the mind of a Buddha, there's still mind, there's still consciousness there. So there are some phenomena where emptiness becomes an eternal phenomenon. There's sometimes when it starts, it has a beginning, but it has no end. Sometimes when it has an end, but it had no beginning. There's sometimes when it's, defined in this very narrow range, such as the life of Don. Don as a being exists from point A to point B, and then everything in between that is Don is together with the emptiness of Don. So emptiness is a phenomenon that gets established within the understanding of something there being there conventionally. It doesn't exist on its own too. It is also not inherently existent. It is a dependent phenomenon. It depends upon the designation of emptiness with regard to the lack of inherent existence of fill in the blank, any particular phenomenon. So the two truths is, and Lama Tsongkhapa is really renowned for having put together a very coherent system for how we can posit reality within this understanding. So back to conventional truth. We initially set up conventional truth with our ignorance, but through the force of realizing ultimate truth, the emptiness of form or emptiness of I, we can then come back to really understand how conventional truths exist, which is once more as dependent arisings, as simply coming into existence on the basis of our designation of a label to a collection of parts. And of course, dependent upon also their causes and conditions, all the things that lead to various phenomena being established by conceptual minds, designating things as what we have agreed to call them, to call things computers and tables and whatever the case might be. So the two truths, and I would encourage you at some point to do, deeper study of the two truths. The one text that is taught as part of the basic program of Tsongkhapa's, that's his middle length Lamrim. Lama Zopa Rinpoche actually encouraged that to be a part of the basic program because of the teachings on the two truths that occur in that text. It's very different than like the Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise that he did. He does a very different analysis. This was said to be kind of his final statement on a lot of things around emptiness and the two truths and so on. But it's an important way to not once more fall into that extreme. If we have an understanding of ultimate truth, emptiness, it pulls us away from our concretizing of things and thinking that things exist inherently. If we have an understanding that is accurate of conventional truth, then we also don't fall into the nihilistic vein, right? Because things can still exist. They exist in the end in the very subtlest way as mere designations, mere imputations, and they coexist with their emptiness at all times. Everything that exists together with its emptiness are sort of, kind of two sides of the same coin, is it one way to look at it. When we look at it from an ultimate perspective, we find its emptiness. But when we look at it purely from a conventional understanding and see the way things arise in dependence upon various factors and how they're merely imputed, we get their conventional understanding, their conventional truth. And these two are completely upheld within this very coherent system of understanding reality, how things actually exist. So I wanted to share a little bit from some other people that give some idea of kind of how to approach this. One of them is going to be from Guy Newland, but I think I'm not sure if I put in his slides here. Whoops, what did I share? It's not what I wanted to share. Let me stop the share. Somehow I pressed on the wrong thing. Share screen. There we go. Okay. All right, let's go on to the next slide here. That's what I'm going to read first. Yeah, actually, I put on my slides, I'm reading a little passage from this. So let me take the screen back off. Wasn't sure if I had some other text up there. So this is from this wonderful little book called Introduction to Emptiness. And even though it says that, you have to look at the fine print. according to Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path. So it's a pretty high level view of emptiness as an introduction to that. So it is a little more complicated at times, but nonetheless, it is, I think, a nice book and does have some ideas that are a little bit easier for beginners at times. So he says, thinking about Tsongkhapa's analogy that he gave in a previous part of the text where, that we never see sounds, but we don't refute them. This is getting at, there's two different valid cognitions here. When we talk about our sense consciousnesses, such as our eye consciousness and our ear consciousness, they both have different objects. Well, they don't refute each other's objects by virtue of knowing their own, right? So we know visual form through our eye consciousness. We know sound through our ear consciousness. The fact that our visual consciousness doesn't know sound doesn't utterly negate sound, right? Because our ear consciousness can know sound. In the same way, these two valid cognitions, our valid cognition of conventional awareness and our valid cognition of ultimate reality, these two are not negated by each other. They are rather objects of different levels of consciousness, different awareness. So he says, thinking about that, he says, this is Guy Newland, I concocted for my students the analogy of two radio stations. Channel A is, quote, all things considered radio. This is our regular conventional channel, and on it we get all kinds of information about the diversity and complexity of the world. Perhaps today they are airing a fierce debate. The proponents of red cars are angry and a raging controversy with the proponents of blue cars. Normally, we listen only to this station, so we take it all at face value and without deeper scrutiny. We are unaware that there is or could be any other channel. But in fact, there is a second station broadcast on Channel B, the ultimate perspective. Channel B's program is all emptiness all the time. Every phenomenon is presented only from the point of view of its ultimate nature on that channel. But when we tune into this channel, all of the detailed information from the other channel is unavailable. From the perspective of ultimate reality, red cars and blue cars are equally and exclusively empty. So whether, the debate that's going on Channel A about red and blue cars, all that detail is lost when you look at their final nature. And you come to understand that whether you're talking about a red car or a blue car or a yellow car or a green car, they're all equally empty of inherent existence. That's how things are one in terms of that status. It doesn't mean all their emptinesses are one. It means that they are all of the same taste. They all are about everything that exists over on Channel A, lacking any inherent existence when we're tuned into Channel B. So Channel B, Emptiness Radio, he says, adds new information and a deeper perspective on what is being discussed on the conventional channel. It shows that the things discussed on Channel A definitely do not exist in the way that they're ordinarily presented. When we come back to Channel A after tuning into B, we now understand just how it is that Channel A is merely conventional. It is not the only or final perspective. But this new information does not, of course, prove that red cars are in all ways identical to blue cars. We still have to make distinctions and make choices about what, if anything, to drive. Channel B alone does not allow us to make practical distinctions, so we still need the information from Channel A. And of course, this is reinforcing this whole idea that we have to uphold our conventional reality. We have to uphold our understanding of karma, our understanding of the path to enlightenment, our understanding of everything the Buddha teaches, and our awareness of the world that we live in within the context of emptiness. Just like we were talking the question about the snake when we were using the rope snake analogy. And of course, when you look at what we actually can impute as a snake correctly, not the rope, but the pieces, body parts of a snake that we correctly impute as a snake, that this doesn't negate that snakes can still be dangerous for us. If you live in the Southwest and you've got, rattlesnakes and what have you, that you might run into, you don't just go, oh, the snake is empty of inherent existence, I'll just pick it up and put it off the trail. You know that you have to respect conventional reality within that, even though you can see the emptiness of the snake, that there's no real snake on that collection of parts. You still have to uphold Channel A information within the understanding of Channel B. Channel B, though, gives you a different perspective on Channel A. As I said, we first establish our conventional truths, we come to understand ultimate truth, then we come back around to really get the very subtle way that things exist as conventionalities. That there's no inherently existent I. The I is merely a dependent arising, merely imputed, nothing more to the I than that. But the I still functions. Karma still functions. rebirth still functions. You know, uh, all the various things in our world still function within the understanding of their emptiness. So maybe that's good enough on the two truths. Let me go back to the screen and see if I had a few more things. I put these slides together for last week's class, and so I kind of forget. Oh, this is kind of an interesting one that I maybe kind of is important to emphasize as well. You probably have seen these sorts of visual, optical kind of things before. And if you look at this from one perspective, you can see it as a duck, right? And you look at it from another perspective, you can see it as a rabbit. But this gets into this idea of these two channels, right? Can you actually hold the awareness of both at the same time? You might be able to say, oh, I'm seeing the duck within an understanding that I could also see it as a rabbit. But in my experience, when I look at it and see it as duck, the rabbit isn't there. I can quickly go to the rabbit and understand that there's a rabbit there from that perspective. But then if I want to see the duck again, I have to sort of shift my understanding. This is the reality that we're all dealing with until we become Buddhas. And this is something that, again, I just thought I'd throw in as some additional information that's worthwhile knowing, is that while we are on the path, continuing our understanding of emptiness, we can be dealing with conventional reality, or we can be dealing with emptiness. And even when you get to the place where you're having these amazing realizations of emptiness, which I haven't achieved, but hopefully all of you will have an opportunity to do that and to know that, and we all will, be able to have that direct realization. When you get to that place, in the space of that wisdom that's realizing emptiness, they say it's like water poured into water. What we are realizing in terms of emptiness becomes sort of one with your awareness, so that you're not having this dualistic thing going on, the understanding of like a subjective awareness knowing an object. Rather, it becomes all one merged experience. Within the space of that, no conventional reality is appearing. You're kind of like only in the sphere of knowing the rabbit. And then over here, we get back out of that meditation and the duck appears again. And we have this inability to kind of be in the understanding that would bring both of those together and know both of them at the same time. So it's just a small example of that kind of reality. Well, when does that change? That changes when you reach Buddhahood. This is actually said to be what these imprints that we have in our minds, these kind of very subtle imprints that have occurred over time due to having this ignorance, they are the final obstacle we need to remove, because they are what are keeping us from having an awareness of the two truths at the same time, an ability to see both rabbit and duck at the same time. So again, it's just an example with that optical analogy, but the idea here is that we are always going to be stuck in this kind of dualistic thing of either knowing one, conventional reality, or knowing the other. We have to listen to channel A or channel B. We can't listen to both channels at the same time. But when you become a Buddha, you have access to all of it. And why is that an important feature? Because then you have the ability to affect the minds of other beings, because you know their conventional reality at a much deeper level, and you know the emptiness of all of that, so that you can function within that and help people to realize that. So a Buddha's mind is free of conceptuality. A Buddha's mind knows everything because they are able to discern things through their omniscient awareness, through having removed all of those obstacles, and they know everything in this non-dualistic manner. But it doesn't mean they don't know more than one object. They know all objects, and they know everything within conventional reality, everything within ultimate reality all the time. They're not just emptiness all the time or conventional reality all the time. Rather, they are everything all the time. So that's just one thing I'd wanted to point out in terms of this Wisdom of Emptiness module, is that there is a deeper purpose for continuing to advance one's understanding of emptiness, not just to remove one's own ignorance so that you're free of your own suffering, but to actually remove the deeper obscurations that keep you from knowing the two truths simultaneously. And that's the mind of a Buddha will be the only mind that actually can do that. When you cross that threshold through the final realization of emptiness, it removes these subtlest obscurations in the mind. You then emerge within this understanding of an enlightened mind that is no longer bound in the ways that our minds are bound. So that's just a little preview of what you have coming for you in your future. You continue to work with the path to enlightenment, and you'll eventually have that ability to know both the rabbit and the duck. So the topics for today, maybe I'll check back in with people to see if there's any questions before I proceed, but I only really have two things that I want to talk about in terms of new material. I had kind of intended to cover most of that other in my last class, and that's why we'll hopefully be able to end a little bit earlier today, is deepening love and compassion with insight, which I actually talked about a little bit in the meditation, and then ways to work with the teachings in this module, kind of some additional discussion of that so that you have some guidance for how to use these teachings within this course. So let me check in and see if there are any questions before I proceed. Was that clear in terms of the two truths and some understanding of karma being operative within all of that? Good. Okay. There is a book by Guy Newland that's a little more advanced called The Two Truths, and he goes into a greater discussion and cites a lot of different Tibetan writers that are in the Gelugpa tradition that really spell out kind of how to see the two truths in a correct way and understand them. But again, it's beyond perhaps what the study in this particular module of Discovering Buddhism is about. But I think, again, this is an important part of the presentation within Gelugpas, because Tsongkhapa felt it was really important from his experience that we avoid, again, any potential of falling into these extremes, to be able to uphold not just emptiness of things, but the conventional nature of things within that. And as I said, he was following Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom's, advice in terms of valuing conventionalities. We have to uphold our conventional world within that understanding. It doesn't utterly negate it. And that would be a grave misunderstanding, if we were actually to think that. So, oh, you're welcome, Aida. Aida had posted something about this emptiness of the mind as an eternal phenomenon. Again, we could talk about, I'll give you the four examples. Okay, so we could say something that is an emptiness which is eternal. It has no beginning and no end. That would be the first possibility. That is the emptiness of the mind. And so the emptiness of your mind, again, not Don's mind, because that might become a little more specific to the mind that is together with Don, but the sort of clear light mind that is the core consciousness that goes through all of our existence. The emptiness of that mind is an eternal phenomenon. It has no beginning, it has no end. Let's talk about something that has a beginning but has no beginning but has an end. That would be the emptiness of your ignorance. So your ignorance has no beginning. It's always been there with your mind, they say, but it's not inherent to the mind. It's just always been there because we've never done the work of eliminating it. But at some point, your ignorance will be removed from your mind. So the emptiness of that ignorance is also, it will have a beginning or no beginning, but it will have an end. Let's talk about something that has a beginning but has no end. That would be the emptiness of a Buddha's mind, or the emptiness of a Buddha awareness, of an omniscient mind. So if we talk about that phenomenon, which begins when one attains Buddhahood, that has a beginning, but it has no end. It will go on in perpetuity, because there will never be anything that will obstruct that omniscient mind from arising, and therefore the emptiness of that mind will always be there. Then if we talk about something that has no beginning and has a beginning and has an end, we're back to the emptiness of Don, right? So Don begins when we have the label of Don being given to this phenomenon that is the body of Don and so on. And then you have an end when that body of Don ceases to support the existence of Don, and you've got bookends there. You have something that has a beginning and has an end. So we have the emptiness of Don. So you can have four different modes of emptiness depending upon what type of phenomenon it's together with. But that really points out again that these two are arising together and coexisting. And as I said, inextricably bound up with each other. And if you do have a phenomenon that ends, then its emptiness ends. We might have a new phenomenon at that point. If I talk about this body, we have the emptiness of Don's body. Well, at some point, when Don ceases to exist and this body becomes worm food or whatever, well, then we give it a new label. Then it's decaying whatever, decaying matter, and then you'd have the emptiness of decaying matter together with that. So there's always going to be something that is arising on the basis of this causal process, another effect that then gives rise to its effect, and so on. So you'd have the emptiness of all these various things, but they're not an identical emptiness in terms of they're with a different base. We've now established it as a different base. The example I was using in the class on Wednesday night that was a little bit more advanced of the seed and the sprout. So if you had this little seed or bean that we put in the ground, and then it eventually becomes a sprout, well, we give two different labels to this, right? The seed is not identical to the sprout. It's not utterly removed from the sprout because it's part of the continuity of that. So it isn't utterly different, inherently different, but nonetheless, the emptiness of seed is going to be a different phenomenon from emptiness of sprout. Why? Because they're two different phenomena. If we establish them as such, and yet we could say that there's an emptiness of whatever it is that we're positing in this whole causal process, from seed into sprout, into a plant, into, the whole plant that arises, the tree, bush, whatever it is that we planted. So emptiness is coexisting with all phenomena, but we would deposit that emptiness together with the phenomenon that is established through our conventional awareness, through our mere designation of phenomena. Any other comments or questions? Okay, then let's talk a little bit about this idea of bringing these two together. Again, most of our compassion and wisdom, most of you have been reading this little book by His Holiness and Jeffrey Hopkins. It's a really wonderful introduction to this profound topic of emptiness. But it's like the whole last section of this. It's part 6. It begins around the text actually begins with page 201. He goes into an analogy that is used that is a really wonderful one, and I actually did teach about this on Wednesday night as well, that Master Chandrakirti gives. Remember I mentioned Nagarjuna earlier, that verse. Well, Nagarjuna expounded upon emptiness, upon the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. I even mentioned this back in the first class, right? Buddha taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. They're pretty difficult to fathom, and so Nagarjuna came along some centuries later and expounded upon them in his fundamental treatise on the middle way, and he developed his particular middle way point of view. That is what we follow. And then there were many debates that happened after this, and Chandrakirti helped to clear up these with a text that actually has become the text that is studied in the monasteries to determine the view of emptiness correctly. And it's a text called the Supplement to the Middle Way, the Madhyamakavatara. And he begins this text in a really interesting way. It's renowned again for its teachings on emptiness. It's structured around the development of a bodhisattva, particularly around the perfections. And so when you get to the perfection of wisdom, it's the longest chapter of the whole text. And it's really quite amazing to study. We studied it in the master's program. But nonetheless, the text starts off with paying homage to compassion. But even in that homage to compassion, that praise to compassion that he begins the text with, he unites it with an understanding of emptiness. He unites it with the wisdom, realizing how things don't exist inherently. So let's go through a little bit of this. And again, you can read His Holiness's book for more information on that. His Holiness, in beginning this part of his book, says, even though it is necessary in the beginning to have a strong will in order to develop love and compassion, will alone is not sufficient to develop these altruistic attitudes limitlessly. It is important to join the practice of love and compassion with the practice of insight, meaning insight into emptiness. Even if you seek to help someone out of concern, without insight, you cannot be very clear about what benefit will come of your efforts. So we need to have some level of wisdom that we're accompanying this with. Now, again, in this context, we could just with what's on the screen, we could say we have to have both the wisdom that knows conventionalities and the wisdom that knows the ultimate nature of things. But here we're mostly emphasizing that latter one, kind of having an understanding of emptiness within that. But nonetheless, we're going to see in these 3 types of compassion that Chandrakirti set out, that they encompass both the conventional understanding of things as well as the ultimate understanding of things. Because once we have all of that, then we have the wisdom we can unite with our compassionate approach to the suffering of others. So these are the 3 types of compassion as they're called by Chandrakirti and the people who've commented on it. The very first one is called compassion observing sentient beings. And that sounds like what we always call compassion, right? And that's pretty much what it is. It's understanding the degree to which sentient beings are suffering due to their own karma and delusions, especially their own self-grasping, this ignorance that's at the root of all their problems. The second one is called compassion observing phenomena, but it's not all phenomena. It's observing those phenomena that are transitory and impermanent, changing moment by moment. And of course, we come to understand that that's reality because the Buddha teaches it and we can analyze it and reason through it ourselves and come to understand that transitory nature of things. But sentient beings are adhering to the opposite, right? They think things exist in an unchanging way. And there's a lot of pain and suffering that arises because sentient beings can't deal with things changing. Look at what we've dealt with in this year, and everybody came into the year with such high expectations about what things were going to be and what we were going to get done this year and what sorts of things we were going to be about. And totally in our face, having to face that reality, everything changing. The third one, though, is where we get to the deeper understanding of emptiness. And this is called compassion, observing the unapprehendable. And why it's called that is because it observes the fact that you cannot apprehend inherent existence. You are observing sentient beings in the understanding that they don't exist inherently. Their inherent existence cannot be apprehended, therefore they are empty of inherent existence. And once more, just like with impermanence, beings are suffering because of this. If this was just an error that people were making that didn't cause any suffering, it'd be one thing. But this is the deepest root of their suffering. The fact that they are apprehending or seeming to apprehend inherent existence, but it is unapprehendable. It cannot be found. Things lack that. Therefore, those beings are empty of inherent existence. All the things they deal with in their lives are lacking inherent existence, and they suffer greatly because they hold to the opposite. So these are set out in terms of three different analogies. The first one, compassion observing sentient beings, is the great compassion that arises for all sentient beings who are wandering powerlessly in samsara, just like the analogy of a bucket traveling in a well. I'll go through these points of analogy briefly. I went through them on Wednesday night too, but I don't want to belabor this again. I do want to conclude a little bit earlier today, but you can find more about this in that very first part of this part 6. It's chapter 21, where you're sort of feeling empathy for others. But this analogy has got like this bucket. There's like a windlass up above it, this mechanism for taking the bucket up and down inside the well. And of course, there's the stone well that has a very deep cavern to it that goes all the way down into the water. And then you have the sides of the well and what have you. So just as the bucket is bound by a rope, so all sentient beings are constrained by their emotions and their karma, their afflictive emotions and their karma. So what is binding us in this well of samsara is our own delusions in our minds, and our own karma we create on the basis of that. Secondly, just as the bucket moves up and down the well by an operator taking the windlass and making the bucket go up and down, so too is our process of going up and down and all over in samsara controlled by our own out of control minds, our own untamed minds, our minds that haven't yet removed all of our delusions and subdued our ignorance and so on. Also, just as the bucket wanders up and down the well, going from one place to another all over the various parts of the well, so too do we wander into various realms of existence, from the lowest states of unbelievable pain that you can experience in the hell realms, which would be in the very bottom, dark, dank part of the well, all the way to the upper realms where you have the light of the sun shining and a bit fresher air, but nonetheless you're still in the well. There are existences that are between all of those that we go back and forth to. The fourth analogy, or fourth point of the analogy, is that it takes great exertion to bring the bucket back up, right, due to gravity, especially if the bucket's full of water. This we know from our own experience, perhaps, but maybe most of us have to interpret it based on, other people, talking about this. I don't know if I've ever drawn a bucket up from a well, but we can imagine that if it's full of water, it's a lot more exertion to get it to go to the upper part, right? Whereas if we want it to go to the lower part, you just drop it in and it goes straight down. Well, it's similar with regard to sentient beings. You have to put in great energy and exertion to get to the upper realms. Whereas to get to the lower realms, you just keep doing what you're doing and you're just going to naturally go into the lower realms, unfortunately. The fifth one is that the bucket is, let's see, this is a different one, and that's in His Holiness's book than what I had on the other one. Let me see if I can find that real quick. Let me get that out here from my class I did the other day. Okay, here we go. So the fifth analogy is that you have the quick rotation of the windlass. Again, the windlass is what's, causing the rope to go up and down due to the operator controlling the windlass. So you have this rotation that is occurring within this that makes it very hard to see where one particular part of it is beginning and one is ending. This has to do with like the wheel of existence that we're on, the 12 links, which I won't go into a full, description of, because that was another teaching. I think I went through that in module 9 of Discovering Buddhism on Samsara and Nirvana, but it makes it very hard to pick out, where does it all begin? It sort of begins with some afflictions, delusions, our ignorance, and then there's some actions that occur, and then we have a rebirth on the base of that, but it all seems to feed into each other. It becomes very circular. That's the idea behind that. The sixth part of the analogy is the fact that the bucket, as it is traveling in the well, is getting battered to pieces, right? The bucket doesn't just go straight down the center of the well and never touch the sides. It just continues to be battered by all the various sufferings that occur. Okay, so that's an analogy. Whether it works for you not or not, this first level of compassion is simply acknowledging the conventional reality that sentient beings are involved in, which is undeniable. Sentient beings, through the force of their ignorance and their untamed minds, are continuing to experience everything within samsara and never being free from that for a moment. Unless they deal with the fundamental cause of all of that, they will never be out of the well. They will continue to just simply be within the well of samsara. That's already very powerful compassion. As I am calling each of these, they're great compassion, which is not just the compassionate wish that others not suffer. It's the taking responsibility for that and saying, I will do then, within my own understanding of what's going on, everything I can to free sentient beings from that suffering. So there are many ways to reflect on the suffering of sentient beings. This is just one analogy that Chandrakirti uses, but it's the first level of our compassion. We have to have that understanding of how beings are suffering for any emotion to well up in us to actually, want to address the suffering of others. The second one, as I said, is earlier, is it has to do with the transitory nature of beings, that they are impermanent, changing moment by moment. So compassion observing phenomena refers to the great compassion that is viewing all these migrating beings, the beings going all over the various realms of existence, as evanescent or momentarily disintegrating, like the reflection of a moon in water that is stirred by a breeze. So I found a little graphic to go with that of the full moon up above this water. But of course, you see that if you watch the water, not in this picture, but if you were there, you would see that based on the ripples, the breeze that is causing the ripples on the water, that it would seem to shimmer and move around and what have you. This is actually the nature of all beings. When we talk about impermanence, we can talk about two levels of impermanence. There's the gross impermanence, such as when dawn goes out of existence, utter annihilation of dawn in terms of the being that was dawn is gone. Consciousness goes on, what have you, all my karma and so on, all the work I've done spiritually or not done spiritually, all that's carried forward with me in terms of, my future existence. But there is gross impermanence. A lot of things in our conditioned world go out of existence. This is just the nature of those rooted in the subtle impermanence, which is the fact that moment by moment things are changing. Look at this body again. This body isn't the same as it was when it was just the two cells of my parents united in my mother's womb, the sperm cell and egg cell that unite together into that ovum and continues to develop in the womb into various phases. They have labels for it at different stages of development, and, grew the little arms and the little head and what have you, all of that happens in the womb. And then of course I come out of the womb and I've got this little baby body and I continue to grow and develop. And this body, even as an adult, continues to change moment by moment, right? And eventually it will go out of existence. Its gross impermanence is rooted in the fact that it's always changing. Sentient beings cling to everything in their lives as if it's unchanging. This is again a source of so much pain for beings, and why we have such a hard time with uncertainty and with things going wrong in our lives and our bodies and whatever. So this is another level of understanding with this analogy that we're like shimmering reflections of the moon that are just constantly changing moment by moment, but we don't like to think of that. In fact, it's kind of painful, but we should accept that reality, and then everything that happens within that grounding of impermanence will be much easier to tolerate. The third level of compassion, as I said earlier, is the unapprehendable, meaning that we cannot apprehend true existence or inherent existence, but nonetheless, we have to recognize that all beings are believing the opposite. They're empty of inherent existence, although they appear to exist inherently, although everything in their world appears to exist inherently. Just like the reflection of the moon in calm, clear water. So here I wasn't able to find a photo, but this is a nice little painting that somebody did that they posted on the internet. So up above, you have the full moon. That is the real full moon. But if we're walking along, maybe up through forest or something, we're coming across this lake, but we can't see up above. We can only see below. And we see the moon reflected in the lake. It might appear to be the real moon, right? Because a reflection sometimes can appear to be very real, but it's not the real moon. The moon is up above, but we're only getting the reflection of it. A reflection is an analogy that the Buddha often used to talk about how things appear to exist with some level of reality that they don't have. Reflection serves as a reflection just fine, but it isn't an actual moon. And so this is the analogy that's used here. Sentient beings likewise are clinging to themselves and to all phenomena as if they have that level of reality that isn't there. It's like a reflection or like a mirage, and various analogies that are used. Chandrakirti uses this idea of the moon and the lake in two different ways. Again, the shimmering that gets at its impermanence, and the calm lake that has this perfectly mirrored reflection of the moon that could be mistaken for the moon. And that's what we're doing. We're mistaking everything that appears to us as if it were real in the way that our ignorance believes in it. And on the basis of that, creating all of our problems. So the reason why I throw this subject in there, of course, part of it is because His Holiness was kind enough to put this into the book, but this is an important way for us to use our understanding of emptiness, to come back around and have it influence our compassion. Remember, we talk about these two wings of a bird. If we're going to fly to the island of enlightenment, we need both wings. A bird can't fly with just one wing. It's never going to get off the ground. Well, we need both the wing of wisdom and the wing of compassion. And so we have to, in our practice, we'll go back and forth between these in the same way that we go back and forth between our ultimate understanding of things, channel B, and our conventional understanding of things, channel A. But we have to be able to begin to unite these two minds and bring them in together within an understanding of why sentient beings are involved in suffering in the first place, due to this ignorance that is grasping at inherent existence, even though they've never existed inherently for even a moment. There's not an atom of inherent existence in the world. So it's really it breaks your heart if you really think about it, because you see that sentient beings wouldn't be suffering if they didn't continue to make this unnecessary mistake. Yeah, we're making that unnecessary mistake. We need to have that compassion for ourselves first as well. But then when we look at others, it should break our hearts that our mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and friends and and enemies, anybody in the world, that they're continuing to experience suffering that's needless. If they only corrected that error, if they only were able to adjust that awareness and that understanding to see what is actually empty of inherent existence as such, then they would no longer cling to this I. They wouldn't cling to phenomena as existing inherently. They wouldn't have any of that clinging and grasping and be free, eventually attaining their own liberation and enlightenment. So I like this. I'm actually teaching another little course for the Florida group on Tuesday nights. It's based on these introductory verses of Chandrakirti's text. We conclude that on Tuesday, and I'll be teaching actually about these three analogies on that night as well. It seems like it's a hot topic for me to teach on these days, but please read His Holiness's passages on that and reflect on that. And it's a really useful way to, again, bring both of these minds together, that we're never sort of completely divorcing ourselves from our compassionate response to the world when we study emptiness, but rather using it as a tool to embrace what we actually need to do to address that suffering, how we can actually help others to be free from that. So that's already a bit of an advice for how to work with these teachings in your everyday life. But nonetheless, let's go on to talk about a few things that are mentioned actually by Thupten Pende, who is a wonderful teacher. He's been in our tradition many, many years. He was ordained at one point. That's why he carries his ordained name, but he is now a lay person living with his wife and daughter. I don't know, I think his daughter's way older now and she's probably on her own, but he used to be the education director of the FPMT. And he did the module for Discovering Buddhism as in an at-home course. And using some of the things from his transcripts, I liked how he presented this. He gave some suggestions for how to work with this module after the fact. First of all, just to spend as much time as you can thinking about emptiness and even discussing it with spiritual friends. I mean, don't discuss it with just anybody on the street. People are going to look at you kind of weird if you start talking about emptiness and they don't really get what you're talking about, and it may end up, not being good for them even to hear teachings on emptiness. There is actually one of the vows that we should be taking at some point in our spiritual path that encourages us not to introduce emptiness to an unsuitable vessel, they often call it, a person who's not really ready for those teachings. If you're going to talk about emptiness to anybody who doesn't have that awareness, it's best to use the teachings on dependent arising. Why? Because they speak to simply how things exist. If you start getting into this word emptiness and things lacking this form of existence, people can get more confused by that, right? We know from our own experience how it gets confusing when you start trying to pinpoint, what do you mean by inherent existence? It's not utter existence, pure existence, because otherwise you would fall into that nihilistic bent. So it gets hard for people to sliver off this thing that we call inherent existence from what does exist. But if you start over here with what does exist, teach about dependent arising. If anyone ever asks you to, could you tell me a little bit about emptiness? I'm kind of intrigued by this subject. Approach it from that point of view of the three levels of dependent arising. It's very easy for people to get that. They may not get the full import of it yet until they've done the other work, but nonetheless, it's an important way to kind of help people get their toe in the water. But it went this first point about thinking about emptiness. Do what you can to bring this to mind as best as you can. I'm going to share in a moment, some advice from Rinpoche about how we do that with everything that we see, trying to see it through various ideas. But the point is that we want to be able to enhance our understanding through bringing it up as frequently as we can in how we are looking at things and talking about things and thinking about things. And discussing it with other people is so important. Of course, nowadays when we're in lockdown in many parts of the country and what have you, and the world, it's very hard to have that opportunity. But, if some of you want to connect from this class and continue discussing on your own, it's good to acknowledge that you may not know all the answers, everybody involved. I don't know all the answers, but, to at least explore from your own reading and understanding and meditation with other people so that you kind of keep it alive. Don't let this be something that just kind of closes off in your own little mind, because sometimes that's where mistakes do happen. If, especially with a topic as profound as emptiness, we can sometimes generate our misunderstandings within this limited and closed off solitary kind of perspective of how we're looking at things. That's why engaging in classes and discussions, that's why we're going to do some discussions as part of the Heart Sutra class in the new year, is so that people can actually discuss the topics that we're going into with each other and develop some understanding of it, rather than letting it just be falling in their own mind and who knows what happens to it from there. So this is an important part of our practice too, is to discuss. In the master's program, we started off with debate, because debate, of course, is what's done traditionally to help the material go deeper in the monasteries. But it's a bit intense. Debate, if you've ever seen it, you have to be on, like, all the time, and it becomes very emotional. We even had some people who were crying in the midst of debate because it puts you on the spot so much. It becomes very emotional. So we ended up doing discussion groups, and discussion groups are maybe the Western version of debate, but you have to be able to kind of get in there and talk about this stuff. You don't know what you do and don't understand until you begin to express it to other people. And when you start expressing it to other people, then you hear from them, well, that's not quite how I heard it. That's not, let me say what I think it means, and then we can talk about it more or whatever. And then you get into a nice little dialogue, but do it very friendly. Don't make this where you're trying to rip the other person to pieces or what have you. But certainly, this is an important part of, especially with these teachings on emptiness, much more so than all the other teachings that we've gone through in discovering Buddhism. The second one is to meditate on the conclusion of your understanding as it evolves. We're not going to have perfect understanding of emptiness right from the get-go, but as you meditate on it, try to bring that awareness into your meditation. Remember, we started this course talking about concentration, and I even mentioned there how you want to kind of go back and forth between what we call our stabilizing meditation and our analytical meditation. So begin with your meditation period with stabilizing the mind on the breath or what have you. Introduce your analysis of the 4-point analysis or whatever. When you get to the conclusion of emptiness, you begin to taste that idea of, wow, things don't have any existence from their own side. They lack that. They're empty of that. Then go back to stabilizing. Use that as what you're stabilizing on so that it begins to deepen and penetrate more deeply into your mind. Then when it begins to wane, go back to the analysis. And then when you get to that point, deepen again. So you're kind of going back and forth between your stability of mind and your analytical mind. Remember how I talked about how these two need to be united in what we call the union of calm abiding and special insight. These two will eventually need to be brought together. So you can already do it with your own meditation. And that's, again, just some advice that Thupten Pende gave that is also quite valuable. The third one is so important, might have been better placed as first, but these are the order that he put them in. Perform purification and accumulation of merit. We've talked about these in other classes, and certainly in Module 8, where we looked at having a daily practice where you're about accumulating merit, having your purification practice as part of your daily routine as well. You can't realize emptiness without a good store of merit, positive potential. Nor can you realize it if you're obscured because you haven't purified some of the karmic obscurations in your own mind. Rinpoche was even talking at a recent, this was one of the last Light of the Path retreats, I think in 2017. They haven't held any since then. But he mentioned there that, a lot of people think, oh, I can go off and get meditative concentration. All I have to do is this, and this, and I'll do it. But he says some people do that, but they don't get that level of concentration. Why? Because they haven't accumulated enough merit. These things sound a bit esoteric, but they are about creating the force of mind through which we can actually accomplish realizations. If you haven't purified negativities, then those things are going to act as a barrier. If you haven't accumulated merit, then you don't have enough gas in the tank to get you the full distance. So these are, again, two important parts of our practice that are also emphasized here in regard to realizing emptiness. The fourth thing that he had mentioned was to recall that ethics is the foundation for concentration. Back in Module 9, we looked at what are called the 3 higher trainings. These 3 higher trainings encapsulate all of what the Buddha taught. The 3 baskets of the Buddha's teachings are in line with these. The first one being ethics, and that's encapsulated in the Vinaya. That's your foundational practice. You have to heed karma and the laws of karma. That's very important. Secondly is concentration, and these are the sutra basket, and that we can develop concentration only if we have a good foundation of ethics. If your mind is always disturbed because you're engaging in unethical behavior, you're never going to get it to settle. And so that's an important thing to recognize, as he's pointing out. The third training, which is encompassed in the Abhidharma basket, is wisdom. So you're never going to develop the wisdom of emptiness to a great degree unless you have good concentration. You're never going to get good concentration unless you have good ethics, good morality. So again, these all 3 fit together. I don't know if I have anything more to share than what Thupten Pende had. I mean, I've been sharing bits and pieces here and there today and in other classes. So those might be good enough to work with. And again, we'll have all these slides posted to the Dropbox for this class. I'll get these to Mary later today for her to do that. I want to share one more thing before we conclude, and this is, again, 3 ways that Rinpoche encourages us to observe phenomena, but you can observe things through whatever way works for you. But these are 3 of the main ways that he encourages us. The first is, if you have that understanding of emptiness, if you've cultivated to some degree, then to hold that view, a bit of what I was saying earlier, just to see everything as empty of existing from its own side. That whatever you encounter, your computer, your phone, your partner or spouse or whoever, roommate, whoever it is that you see, your pets, you see them as not existing from their own side. They're empty of that. That's, of course, a given. That's part of what we want to bring to our understanding of the world that we inhabit. Secondly, as merely imputed by the mind, to remember that when we are encountering things, that my computer certainly doesn't exist from its own side, but it's also merely imputed. There's no real computer in front of me. It's just a label being given to this collection of parts. The third one is this idea of focusing on the hallucination that's going on. We talked about this last week, I think it was, where we went into the idea that, again, and I mentioned earlier today, things appear to be inherently existent. it's an illusion, or like an illusion or hallucination. Things appear to have their own inherent existence, but they don't exist that way at all. So everything that appears to you is deceptive, unless you're realizing emptiness directly, because emptiness is the only phenomenon that exists in the way that it appears. Everything else, as we saw when we looked at conventional truths earlier today, is posited together with that ignorance, and it appears to be existing from its own side. This is where we kind of get the idea that everything is hallucinatory, illusion-like. Again, it's not that it is an illusion, rather that it has that quality of an illusion, appearing to exist in one way and existing in an opposite way, just like a hallucination. If you've ever taken any hallucinatory substances, you know that what you're seeing isn't there in reality. It's a creation of this substance in your mind, So anyway, that's some ideas. I mentioned earlier today about Rinpoche seeing everything, saying you could see everything as like a movie from your karma. I mean, that's also a useful one. Don't fall into the extreme of thinking that doesn't matter then, or it doesn't exist. This truck that's about, barreling down the road and I'm about ready to cross that, it's just an illusion and therefore I don't have to worry about that truck. No, you still pay attention to it. Just like I said earlier, the snake still can harm you. You still have to treat them with an understanding of that conventional reality, but begin to peel away the illusion that's going on there, the hallucination, the movie that we're creating, and see it for what it is, not having its own existence. So any questions or comments to wrap up today? I did pretty well, only a few minutes after noon, but um, good. So if there are no questions, then I think we do our dedication prayers. As I've mentioned way back at the beginning of this course, frequently in Discovering Buddhism, we do like a practice day at the end of the modules where we gather and kind of go through meditations together and discussion and what have you. And we could certainly try to do that for this course at some point in the new year, but we've sort of left it off the schedule. So I apologize that you're not getting that opportunity, but please do try to take advantage of, other ways to do the similar types of things. To engage in discussion with those that you can that have some understanding of this topic to help fine tune that, and certainly to do all the meditations that were assigned that again are all out at the Dropbox. I think the meditation for today is simply about cultivating an awareness of emptiness, and so just work with that. It's just again pretty standard meditation, but all right, Anil, so if we could go ahead and get the prayers up on the screen, then we will do our dedication prayers. So think about the merit we've created today, but also throughout this whole course, those of you who've been, taking part in this course from the very beginning, and think that all this merit we've created, we want the best possible result. And we're going to use this prayer from Master Shantideva to kind of send that positive energy out to all beings. And you can begin by thinking about those beings that you're holding in your heart right now that are very important to you, very dear to you. But don't let it stop there. Think about all beings, whether they're friends, strangers, enemies. We want all of them to benefit from the force of what we've done here and attain the greatest possible level of happiness and well-being. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. And then let's dedicate for the lives of our precious teachers. One thing that I always have to remind myself to mention whenever we're doing teachings on emptiness, it's so worthwhile to receive teachings on emptiness from these great beings, others who are highly accomplished. I have some intellectual understanding, a wee bit of that, and I can present emptiness from that perspective. But we need these beings in our lives who have realized this topic to give us greater inspiration and deeper instruction on how we actually attain these realizations of emptiness and so on. So make strong prayers for your own ability to benefit from these beings, as well as for these beings to have good health and long life, and to continue to be in our lives and in the lives of others. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then for Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then for Osohito, who's Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Wonderful. Thank you, Anil, for your help and being the host for this month. And thank you all for your participation in this. And again, keep in mind, one thing, I'm not sure what happens to the drop boxes when the courses sort of come off our calendar, but know that you might want to bookmark the Dropbox from this course if you want to ever go back and get any of the materials or what have you. Again, I'll be giving the slides from today to Mary. She'll post them there. And I think all the videos get onto YouTube within a short while after they're produced. So this one will appear on YouTube soon. So if you need to catch up on any of the other classes from this, you can do that. But anyway, everyone have a very safe and pleasant holiday season. And I will see you all in the new year. Some of you I may see at the meditations on Tuesday mornings. I'm leading those the next 2 weeks. We won't be doing any emptiness meditations. It's only a half hour, so it's a little bit challenging to fit one in. But nonetheless, I may see you there. But otherwise, I hope to see you in the new year on either Wednesday or Sunday. So, all right, everyone. Take care now. Be well. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, everyone.